The November rain hammered down on the cracked sidewalks of South Philadelphia with relentless intensity. Pete Rose pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders, the thin fabric doing little to protect him from the biting cold that swept through the narrow streets of his neighborhood. At 42 years old, Pete had become intimately familiar with these streets, every pothole, every graffiti-tagged wall, every corner where trouble usually waited. The streetlights flickered weakly overhead, casting long shadows across the wet pavement as Pete made his way home from his second shift at the warehouse. His work boots, 3 years past their prime, squelched with each step, water seeping through the cracked leather. His back ached from loading boxes for 10 hours straight, and his hands, calloused and rough, throbbed from gripping the hand truck all day. Pete wasn't always working 2 jobs to make ends meet. 5 years ago, he'd been a skilled electrician with his own small business, a comfortable apartment in a better part of town, and a savings account that actually had money in it. But life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. His wife, Sarah, had left him 3 years ago, taking their daughter Emma with her to Pittsburgh. The divorce had drained what little savings he'd managed to accumulate, and shortly after, the economic downturn had forced him to close his business. Now, Pete lived in a studio apartment above a Chinese takeout restaurant, the smell of fried rice permanently embedded in his few possessions. He worked at Morrison's warehouse during the day and cleaned office buildings at night, sending whatever money he could spare to Sarah for Emma's expenses, even though the court had never mandated it. His daughter was 16 now, and he hadn't seen her in person for over 8 months. As Pete turned onto Tasker Street, something caught his eye near the overflowing dumpster behind the old Peterson building. A cardboard box, medium-sized and remarkably dry despite the downpour, sat propped against the brick wall under a narrow overhang. Most people would have walked right past it, but Pete's electrician instincts, even dormant ones, noticed things others missed. The box was taped shut with professional packing tape, and unlike the usual trash that accumulated in this area, it looked deliberately placed rather than carelessly discarded. Pete hesitated. In this neighborhood, mysterious boxes could contain anything from stolen goods to something far more dangerous. His rational mind told him to keep walking, to mind his own business, to get home and collapse into bed before his alarm went off in 6 hours. But something about the box nagged at him. It had a shipping label, though the rain had smudged most of the address beyond recognition. Looking around the empty street, Pete approached the box. His heart rate quickened slightly, a mix of curiosity and caution. The box wasn't heavy when he lifted it, maybe 15 pounds at most. He shook it gently and heard the rustling of papers inside, along with something that sounded like plastic cases clicking against each other. "Just take it home and look," Pete muttered to himself. "If it's nothing, throw it out. If it's something illegal, call the cops." He tucked the box under his arm and hurried the remaining 3 blocks to his apartment. The narrow stairway leading to his floor smelled like cigarette smoke and mildew, and he had to step over Mrs. Chen's cat, which had claimed the landing as its territory. His key stuck in the lock as usual, requiring the specific jiggle and turn technique he'd perfected over the past year. Inside his apartment, Pete kicked off his soaked boots and set the box on his small kitchen table. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed annoyingly, but he'd learned to tune it out. His studio was sparse. A futon that served as both couch and bed, a table with 2 mismatched chairs, a mini fridge, a hot plate, and a small TV he'd bought at a pawn shop. The walls were bare, except for a calendar from 2023 that he'd never bothered to replace, and a single photograph of Emma from her elementary school graduation, back when she still smiled easily in his presence. Pete stared at the box for a long moment before retrieving a box cutter from the drawer. The tape split easily under the sharp blade, and he pulled back the flaps to reveal the contents inside. His breath caught in his throat. The box was filled with bundles of cash, crisp $100 bills bound with paper bands. Pete's hands trembled as he reached inside, his mind racing. Beneath the top layer of money, he found a laptop, several USB drives, and a thick manila folder filled with documents. His heart pounded so loudly he could hear it in his ears. With shaking hands, Pete pulled out one bundle of bills. The paper band read $10,000. He quickly counted the bundles visible on top. There had to be at least 20 of them, possibly more underneath. His mental math, dulled by exhaustion, struggled to process the implications. This box contained at least $200,000, maybe more. Pete sat down heavily on one of his chairs, which creaked under his weight. For several minutes, he simply stared at the money, his mind blank with shock. Then the questions started flooding in. Where had this come from? Who did it belong to? Why was it sitting behind a dumpster in South Philadelphia? He pulled out the manila folder with trembling fingers and opened it. Inside were dozens of documents, bank statements, wire transfer records, and what appeared to be accounting ledgers. The name at the top of several documents read Castellano Construction and Development LLC. Pete recognized the name vaguely. Castellano Construction was a major development company in Philadelphia, responsible for several large building projects throughout the city. As Pete flipped through the documents, his electrician background helped him recognize something important. These weren't normal business records. The numbers didn't add up correctly. There were payments labeled as materials and subcontractor fees that seemed wildly inflated. Wire transfers to offshore accounts. Multiple sets of books showing different numbers for what appeared to be the same projects. Pete had seen enough crime documentaries to understand what he was looking at. Evidence of fraud, money laundering, or both. His phone buzzed in his pocket, making him jump. It was a text from his daughter, Emma. "Dad, I need $400 for the class trip to Washington, D.C. Mom says she can't afford it right now. Can you help?" Pete stared at the message, then at the money spread across his table. $400. That was just 4 bills from one of these bundles. Emma had been asking him about this trip for months, and he'd been desperately trying to scrape together the money. He'd picked up extra shifts, skipped meals, let his phone bill go unpaid. And now, here was more money than he'd seen in his entire life sitting in his dingy apartment. He could take a few bills. Who would know? He could give Emma the trip money, pay his overdue rent, maybe finally get his car fixed. The rest, he could turn that in to the police along with the documents. He'd be doing the right thing mostly. But as Pete's fingers touched the crisp bills, a memory surfaced. He was 8 years old, standing in his father's garage workshop. His father, Michael Rose, was showing him how to wire a light fixture. "Pete," his father had said, his weathered hands steady and sure, "being a good man isn't about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you do when nobody's looking." The easy choice and the right choice are rarely the same thing. His father had been a plumber, honest to a fault, and had died when Pete was 19. Michael Rose had never been wealthy, but he'd been respected. Pete could still remember the line of people at his father's funeral, clients, friends, neighbors, all sharing stories about Michael's integrity and kindness. Pete closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He opened them and looked around his shabby apartment at the photograph of Emma, at the phone displaying her hopeful message. Then he looked back at the money. The temptation was overwhelming. This could solve every problem he had. He could get a decent apartment, see Emma more often, maybe even start his business again. All it would take was a moment of rationalization, finders keepers. They'd never miss it. He deserved a break after everything he'd been through. But his father's voice echoed in his mind. The easy choice and the right choice are rarely the same thing. Pete spent the rest of the night examining the documents more carefully. He didn't open the laptop. That seemed like a line he shouldn't cross. But the papers told a damning story. Castellano Construction had been involved in several city contracts, including a public housing renovation project and a new community center in North Philadelphia. According to these documents, they'd been systematically overcharging the city, paying off inspectors, and using substandard materials while pocketing the difference. As dawn broke over Philadelphia, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink, Pete had made his decision. He carefully repacked everything into the box, making sure nothing was missing. Then he pulled out his phone and called the police non-emergency number. "Philadelphia Police, how can I help you?" Pete cleared his throat. "Hi, my name is Pete Rose. I found something last night that I think the police need to see. It's a box containing a large amount of cash and documents that appear to show illegal activity by a construction company." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, can you repeat that?" Pete did, providing his address and a brief explanation of how he'd found the box. The dispatcher told him to stay put and that officers would be there within the hour. As Pete waited, he texted Emma back, "Sweetheart, I'm working on getting you that money. Give me a few days, okay? Love you." He knew he'd just given up his daughter's trip money, his rent money, his chance at a better life. But as he sat in his cramped apartment watching the sunrise, Pete felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like his father's son. Detective Sarah Martinez arrived at Pete's apartment at 7:47 a.m., accompanied by her partner, Detective James Chen. Both were from the Financial Crimes Unit, which told Pete this was being taken seriously. Martinez was in her late 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything in his apartment within seconds of entering. Chen was younger, maybe early 30s, and carried a large camera bag along with his badge. "Mr. Rose." Martinez extended her hand. Her grip was firm and professional. "Thank you for calling this in. That's not something we see every day." Pete shook her hand, suddenly very aware of how his apartment must look to them. The bare walls, the futon with its faded sheets, the smell of fried rice drifting up from below. "Just Pete is fine. The box is on the table, exactly as I found it, except for the documents I looked through." Chen immediately began photographing everything, while Martinez pulled on latex gloves and started examining the contents. She worked methodically, her expression neutral, occasionally making notes on a small tablet. Pete stood awkwardly near the door, unsure what to do with his hands. "You said you found this behind the Peterson building on Tasker Street?" Martinez asked, not looking up from the documents. "Yes, ma'am, around midnight last night. I was walking home from work at Morrison's warehouse. The box was under an overhang, staying dry despite the rain. It just seemed deliberately placed, you know." Martinez looked up at him. "And you didn't take any of the money?" The question hung in the air. Pete met her gaze steadily. "No, ma'am. I thought about it. I won't lie to you, I really thought about it. But it's not mine, and these documents suggest it's connected to something serious." "You looked through the documents?" "Some of them. I used to be an electrician, worked on construction sites. I recognized what looked like fraudulent billing practices. That's when I knew I needed to call you folks." Chen had finished photographing and was now counting the money with a portable bill counter he'd pulled from his bag. "Detective Martinez, preliminary count shows approximately $240,000 in cash, all hundreds, most of them sequential serial numbers." Martinez's eyebrows rose slightly. She turned her attention back to Pete. "Mr. Rose, I need to be clear with you about something. This is likely evidence in an ongoing investigation or, at minimum, the proceeds of criminal activity. You did the right thing by calling us. However, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you understand?" Pete's stomach tightened. "Am I in trouble?" "That depends on your answers," Martinez said, but her tone wasn't unkind. "Let's start with the basics. Where were you between the hours of 6 p.m. and midnight yesterday?" For the next 40 minutes, Pete recounted his entire day. His shift at the warehouse, the names of co-workers who could confirm his presence, his route home, the discovery of the box. Martinez asked detailed questions about everything. Did he see anyone else on the street? Did he notice any cars? Had he ever worked for Castellano Construction? Did he know anyone connected to the company? To all of these, Pete answered truthfully. He'd never worked for Castellano, didn't know anyone there, and hadn't seen anyone suspicious. He provided his phone, which Chen examined to confirm his location data matched his story. Finally, Martinez sat back. "Mr. Rose, I'm going to be frank with you. What you found is evidence in what appears to be a significant fraud case. The documents alone are potentially explosive. If these are authentic, they show systematic corruption in city construction contracts worth millions of dollars. The money is likely a payoff or payment that was supposed to be picked up. So, someone's going to come looking for it," Pete said quietly. "That's a possibility we have to consider." Martinez exchanged a glance with Chen. "We're going to need you to come down to the station and give a formal statement. We'll also need to speak with your employer to verify your timeline. And Mr. Rose, until this is resolved, I strongly suggest you be very careful. If someone realizes their box is missing and traces it back to you—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Pete understood perfectly. He'd just become involved in something much bigger than a found box of cash. At the police station, Pete spent another 3 hours going over his story with Martinez and several other detectives. They took his fingerprints for elimination purposes, they assured him, and had him sign what felt like a dozen different forms. Throughout the process, he kept checking his phone, watching the time tick away. He was supposed to be at his cleaning job at 2 p.m. "Detective Martinez," Pete said when they finally finished, "I need to get to my second job. Can I go?" Martinez looked at her watch and grimaced. "Yes. But Mr. Rose, Pete, I need you to understand the situation you're in. This box represents evidence of significant criminal activity. The good news is that your story checks out. We've verified your employment, your timeline, everything. You're a witness, not a suspect. The bad news is that we don't yet know who you're a witness against." "What does that mean for me?" "It means you need to be vigilant. Don't discuss this with anyone, not friends, not family, not co-workers. If anyone approaches you asking questions about the box or about that night, you contact me immediately." She handed him her business card. "My cell phone is on the back. Call anytime, day or night." Pete took the card, a sense of dread settling in his stomach. Am I in danger? Honestly, we don't know yet. But $240,000 doesn't just get left behind a dumpster by accident. Someone made a mistake, or something went wrong with their plan. When they realize the money and documents are missing, they're going to investigate. We're working on tracking down who owns that box and where it came from, but these things take time. As Pete left the police station, the afternoon sun was trying unsuccessfully to break through Philadelphia's perpetual gray clouds. He felt exhausted, not just from lack of sleep, but from the emotional weight of the past 12 hours. He'd done the right thing, he knew that, but it didn't feel like the universe was rewarding his honesty. Instead, he was potentially in danger, and he still had no money for Emma's trip. He made it to his cleaning job 15 minutes late. His supervisor, Tom Brennan, a heavy-set man with a perpetual scowl, met him at the entrance of the Riverside office complex. "Rose, you're late. That's the 3rd time this month." "I'm sorry, Tom. There was an emergency." "I don't want to hear it. You've got Building C tonight, all 6 floors. And Pete, you're on thin ice here. One more late arrival and you're done. We've got a dozen guys who'd love your spot." Pete bit back a response and nodded. He couldn't afford to lose this job, not now more than ever. He grabbed his cleaning cart and headed to Building C, his body protesting every step. As he mopped floors and emptied trash cans, Pete's mind kept circling back to the box. Who had it belonged to? Why had it been behind that specific dumpster? And most importantly, what would happen when whoever lost it came looking for it? His phone buzzed around 9 p.m. It was a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Rose, this is Detective Martinez. Just checking in. Everything okay?" Pete appreciated the gesture, though it also reinforced how serious this situation was. "All good. At work, cleaning offices. Nothing unusual. Stay alert. We're making progress on identifying the box's origin. We'll update you tomorrow." Pete finished his shift at 1 a.m., his body aching and his mind foggy with exhaustion. The walk home felt longer than usual, and he found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at shadows. Every car that passed seemed suspicious. Every person on the street might be looking for a box of money and a man who'd found it. Back in his apartment, Pete collapsed onto his futon without even taking off his shoes. He stared at the ceiling, where a water stain had formed the vague shape of a bird in flight. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Emma. "Dad, the deadline for the trip payment is Friday. That's only 3 days away. Mum's really stressed about money, and I don't want to ask her again. Can you help, please?" Pete closed his eyes, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on his chest. He'd given up Emma's trip money, his chance to be the father she needed, all to do the right thing. And now he couldn't even tell her why he couldn't help her. He typed back, "I'm working on it, sweetheart. Trust me." But even as he sent the message, Pete wasn't sure who he was trying to convince, Emma or himself. He'd done what his father would have done, made the choice that honor demanded. But as he lay in his shabby apartment, alone and broke and potentially in danger, Pete couldn't help wondering if being honest was worth the cost. The next morning, Pete was awakened by pounding on his door. His heart raced as he stumbled out of bed, grabbing the baseball bat he kept in the corner, a remnant from his days coaching Emma's softball team. The clock read 6:47 a.m. "Mr. Rose, Philadelphia Police!" Pete relaxed slightly and opened the door to find 2 uniformed officers, neither of whom he recognized. Behind them stood Detective Martinez. "Detective? What's going on?" Martinez's expression was grave. "Pete, we need to talk. Can we come in?" Once inside, Martinez wasted no time. "The box you found belonged to Vincent Castellano, CEO of Castellano Construction. More specifically, it was supposed to be delivered to Anthony DeLuca, a city councilman who's been on Castellano's payroll for the past 3 years. Pete sank into his chair. "A councilman? This goes that high?" "Higher. We've been investigating Castellano Construction for 8 months as part of a larger corruption probe. That box contains evidence we've been trying to obtain through legal channels without success. Those documents, Pete? They're the missing piece we needed. Wire transfer records, payoff schedules, falsified inspection reports, it's all there. So this is good news, right? You got your evidence?" Martinez's expression darkened. "It would be, except for one problem. Last night, someone burned down the Peterson building. The entire structure, it's gone." Pete felt the blood drain from his face. "The building where I found the box?" "The same. The fire started around 3 a.m. Arson, definitely. Someone was trying to destroy evidence, probably didn't realize the box was already gone. Pete, we think whoever lost that box is trying to cover their tracks. And when they realize the box is missing, if they don't already, they're going to start looking for it. Are you saying my life is in danger?" "I'm saying we need to take precautions. We can offer you protective custody." "I can't," Pete interrupted. "I have 2 jobs. I can barely make rent as it is. If I disappear, I lose both jobs. And then what? I lose my apartment. I lose what little connection I have with my daughter." Martinez leaned forward. "Pete, Vincent Castellano is connected. Not mob exactly, but he has resources and friends in low places. If he thinks you saw something that could put him in prison, he won't hesitate to eliminate that threat. But I turned everything over to you. I don't have anything. He doesn't know that. All he knows is that his insurance policy, that box of evidence and money, went missing the same night a fire was supposed to destroy his problems. He's going to investigate, and that investigation will lead to the warehouse where you work, the route you take home, the people who might have seen something. Pete put his head in his hands. 24 hours ago, he'd been a simple working man with money problems, but no real troubles. Now he was caught in the middle of a corruption investigation involving hundreds of thousands of dollars and people who apparently didn't hesitate to commit arson. "What do I do?" he asked quietly. Martinez pulled out her phone. "First, you're going to take my advice seriously. Second, we're going to put a patrol car on your street, plainclothes officers keeping an eye on your building. Third, you're going to trust me when I tell you that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, matters. We're going to build a case that puts Castellano and DeLuca away for a very long time. And Pete, there's something else you should know." She pulled up something on her phone and showed him a news article. "The city has a whistleblower reward program for people who provide evidence of fraud in city contracts. If our case is successful and those documents prove what we think they prove, you could be eligible for up to 10% of the recovered funds. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. 10% could be—" "I don't want a reward," Pete said firmly. "I didn't do this for money. I did it because it was right." Martinez smiled for the first time since Pete had met her. "That's exactly why you deserve it. But that's a conversation for later. Right now, we focus on keeping you safe and building our case." After the detectives left, Pete called in sick to both his jobs, the first time he'd done so in over a year. He spent the day in his apartment, watching the street below through his grimy window, jumping at every sound. A patrol car sat at the corner, its presence both reassuring and terrifying. It meant he was protected, but it also meant he needed protection. Around 3 p.m. his phone rang. It was Sarah, his ex-wife. "Pete, Emma told me you promised to help with her trip money. Were you serious about that?" Pete closed his eyes. "Sarah, I'm dealing with something complicated right now. I want to help, I really do, but what? You're too busy working your dead-end jobs? Too busy feeling sorry for yourself? This trip means everything to Emma. It's a chance for her to see Washington, to feel normal, to not be the poor kid who can't afford things. And once again, you're letting her down." The words stung because they carried a kernel of truth. "That's not fair." "You know what's not fair? Having a father who can't keep his promises. I'll figure it out myself, like always. Don't bother calling Emma until you have something real to offer." She hung up before Pete could respond. He sat in the silence of his apartment, the phone still pressed to his ear, feeling like the worst father in the world. He'd given up the money that could have helped Emma, had done what honor demanded, and somehow he was still the bad guy in everyone's eyes. That night, as Pete tried to sleep, he heard footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. They stopped at his door. For a long moment there was silence. Then came 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Pete's heart hammered. He grabbed his phone and the baseball bat. "Who is it?" No answer. Just silence. Then the footsteps retreated back down the hall. Pete didn't sleep that night. He sat on his futon with the bat across his lap, watching the door, wondering if doing the right thing was going to cost him everything, including possibly his life. The next morning, Detective Martinez arrived at Pete's apartment with coffee and bagels, along with 2 plainclothes officers who introduced themselves as Officers Ramirez and Thompson. They looked more like construction workers than police, dressed in jeans and flannel shirts, but both had the watchful eyes of people trained to spot trouble. "Pete, tell me about last night," Martinez said, handing him a coffee. Pete recounted the footsteps and the knocking, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "I didn't open the door. After about 30 seconds, whoever it was left. I watched from the window, but I couldn't see anyone on the street." Martinez exchanged glances with Ramirez. Mrs. Chen downstairs reported someone asking about you yesterday afternoon. Said he was looking for the guy in 3B, claimed to be your cousin from Pittsburgh. She told him you weren't home. I don't have a cousin in Pittsburgh. I don't have family anywhere except Emma and Sarah. We figured. Mrs. Chen gave us a description. White male, mid-40s, about 6 feet tall, wearing a gray suit. She said he seemed too fancy for this neighborhood. Martinez pulled out a tablet and showed Pete a series of photographs. Recognize any of these men? Pete studied each photo carefully. The faces were unfamiliar until he reached the 8th image, a man in his late 40s with graying hair and cold blue eyes. Something about the shape of his face, the set of his jaw, triggered a memory. I'm not certain, but this guy looks like someone I might have seen at the warehouse, maybe 2 weeks ago. He was talking to Mr. Morrison, the owner, near the loading dock. I remember thinking it was odd because Morrison usually doesn't take meetings on the warehouse floor. Martinez's expression sharpened. That's Gerald Vance. He's Vincent Castellanos' head of security. Former police officer, left the force under questionable circumstances about 10 years ago. If he's showing interest in you, that's not good. Former cop? So he knows how investigations work? Exactly. Which makes him particularly dangerous. Martinez set down her coffee. Pete, I'm going to be straight with you. Our case against Castellano is moving forward rapidly, thanks to the evidence you provided. The documents are authentic. We've verified the account numbers, cross-referenced the wire transfers, matched them to city payment records. We're talking about systematic fraud spanning 3 years and at least a dozen major projects. The total amount defrauded from the city could exceed $8 million. Pete whistled low. And I'm sitting here in the middle of it. The good news is that we're moving fast. We plan to execute search warrants on Castellano Construction's offices and Councilman DeLuca's home office tomorrow morning. Once we do that, this becomes very public very quickly. Castellano and his people will have bigger problems than finding out who discovered their lost box. And until tomorrow, you stay safe. Ramirez and Thompson will be stationed in the building. We've arranged with your landlord to use the vacant apartment on the 2nd floor. They'll maintain visual contact with your door. You go nowhere alone, understand? Not to work, not to the corner store, nowhere. Pete nodded, though the reality of being under protective surveillance felt surreal. Can I ask you something? Why would they leave a box like that behind a dumpster? Seems like a stupid place for a handoff. Martinez smiled grimly. That's the question we've been asking. Based on phone records we subpoenaed, we think it was supposed to be a dead drop. DeLuca was supposed to pick it up that night after a city council meeting that ran late. But something spooked him. Maybe he saw a patrol car, maybe just got paranoid. He never showed. Someone, probably Vance, went back to retrieve the box the next morning. But by then, you'd already found it. So it was pure bad luck for them. Or good luck for the citizens of Philadelphia. That box represents not just evidence, but also leverage. Without it, Castellano might have been able to pressure DeLuca into staying quiet. Now, DeLuca's going to flip on Castellano so fast it'll make your head spin. Over the next several hours, Martinez walked Pete through what would happen next. The raids would occur at 6 a.m. the following morning, simultaneous execution of warrants at multiple locations. Pete would need to be available to testify before a grand jury within the next few weeks. His identity, as the person who found the box, would eventually become public record, but the DA's office would do everything possible to minimize his exposure. What about my jobs? Pete asked. I've already called in sick twice this week. Tom at the cleaning company made it pretty clear I'm on my last chance. We'll handle it. We can have someone from the DA's office call your employers, explain that you're assisting in a criminal investigation. They can't fire you for that. It's illegal. Legal and reality aren't always the same thing, Detective. Even if they can't officially fire me, they can make my life hell or find another reason to let me go." Martinez didn't have a good answer for that, and Pete appreciated that she didn't try to offer empty reassurances. Around 2 p.m., Pete's phone rang. It was Emma calling, not texting, unusual enough that his heart rate spiked. "Emma, everything okay? Dad, I just wanted to say thank you." Her voice sounded thick with emotion. "Mom told me you sent money for my trip. The school just confirmed my spot." Pete's confusion must have shown on his face. Martinez, who could hear Emma's voice through the phone, looked equally puzzled. "Emma, sweetheart, I didn't send any money." "What are you talking about?" "Mom said you transferred $500 into her account this morning. She was surprised too, said you must have worked extra shifts or something. She said she was proud of you for coming through." Pete's mind raced. He hadn't sent any money. He didn't even have $500 to send. "Emma, can you put your mom on the phone?" A moment later, Sarah's voice came through, warmer than it had been in months. "Pete, I have to admit I'm impressed. I didn't think you had it in you to scrape together that kind of money right now. Emma's over the moon. Sarah, I didn't send you any money. I don't know what you're talking about." Silence. Then, in a colder tone, "Pete, if this is some kind of joke, I'm serious. Check the transfer details. Where did the money come from?" He heard typing, presumably Sarah checking her bank account on her computer. "It says it came from a wire transfer from Pennsylvania Community Bank, from an account under your name. Pete, what's going on?" Martinez was already on her phone, calling someone. Pete could hear the urgency in her voice as she rattled off account numbers and requested an immediate trace. "Sarah, something strange is happening. I need you to not spend that money, okay? Can you transfer it to a separate account, somewhere that Emma can't access it, and not touch it until I figure this out?" "Pete, you're scaring me." "What's going on? I can't explain right now, but please just trust me. Don't spend the money. I'll call you back soon." He hung up and looked at Martinez, who had finished her call. Her expression was dark. "Pete, that transfer didn't come from any account you own. The bank it originated from doesn't show any account in your name. Someone created a fake wire transfer using your identity. Why would someone do that? To establish a connection, to make it look like you're involved." Martinez began pacing, her mind clearly working through the implications. Think about it. Castellano knows his box is missing. He knows someone found it. If he can make it look like you're the one who stole it, like you're trying to keep the money and profit from it, then I look guilty. It discredits me as a witness. Exactly. And more than that, if money starts appearing in accounts connected to you, if you suddenly have funds you can't explain, it creates reasonable doubt. A defense attorney could argue you're not a good Samaritan who turned in evidence. You're someone who got caught with stolen money and made up a story. Pete felt sick. So not only am I in danger from Castellano's people, but now they're trying to frame me as a thief? It's clever, Martinez admitted grimly. Evil, but clever. Whoever's behind this, probably Vance, is trying to neutralize you as a threat by destroying your credibility. What do? We document everything. I'm having our forensics team trace that wire transfer back to its source. We'll prove it was fraudulent, but Pete, this confirms what we suspected. They know who you are, and they're actively working against you. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of phone calls, documentation, and what Martinez called defensive measures. The DA's office was brought in, along with the FBI's public corruption unit. What had started as a city-level fraud case was rapidly expanding into something much larger. Around 6 p.m., Officer Thompson knocked on Pete's door with dinner, takeout from a Vietnamese restaurant 2 blocks away. "Figured you needed real food, not just coffee and bagels," he said with a friendly smile. Pete thanked him and ate mechanically, tasting nothing. His phone buzzed constantly. Texts from Emma asking why she couldn't spend the trip money, calls from Sarah demanding explanations, even a message from his warehouse supervisor asking when he'd be back to work. Martinez had told him not to explain anything to anyone, to keep his responses vague. Tell them you're sick, tell them you're dealing with a family emergency, tell them anything except the truth. But lying didn't come naturally to Pete, and each vague response felt like another small betrayal of the honesty his father had instilled in him. As night fell, Pete stood at his window, watching the lights of Philadelphia flicker to life across the darkening cityscape. The patrol car remained at the corner, a silent guardian. Somewhere out there, Vincent Castellano and Gerald Vance were making their own plans, trying to protect themselves and silence the threat Pete represented. Around 9 p.m., Martinez returned with news. We've traced the wire transfer. It originated from a shell account in the Cayman Islands, then was routed through 3 different banks before landing in Sarah's account. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing. It's the kind of money laundering technique used by organized crime. Can you prove I didn't do it? We can prove the account doesn't actually belong to you, yes, but proving a negative is always harder than proving a positive. The best defense is a strong offense. Tomorrow's raids will shift the narrative entirely. Once Castellano and DeLuca are arrested, once the media starts covering this story, you become the hero who exposed corruption, not the thief who got caught. I never wanted to be a hero, Pete said quietly. I just wanted to do the right thing. Martinez smiled. That's usually how heroes are made. After she left, Pete tried to sleep, but couldn't. His mind kept cycling through everything that had happened. 3 days ago, his biggest problem had been making rent and scraping together money for Emma's school trip. Now, he was under police protection, being framed by criminals and caught in the middle of a corruption scandal that apparently reached into the highest levels of Philadelphia city government. At 2:17 a.m., Pete was lying on his futon staring at the ceiling when he heard glass breaking. Not in his apartment, somewhere below in the restaurant. Then came shouting in Cantonese, Mrs. Chen's voice raised in alarm. Pete grabbed his phone and baseball bat, then cautiously opened his door. Ramirez was already in the hallway, weapon drawn, radio to his lips. Possible break-in on the first floor. Thompson, secure the witness. I'm checking it out. Thompson appeared and ushered Pete back into his apartment. Stay inside. Lock the door. Through his window, Pete watched as multiple police cars arrived, lights flashing but sirens silent. Officers entered the building below. For 10 agonizing minutes, he heard nothing but muffled voices and footsteps. Finally, Martinez called, "Pete, it's okay. Someone threw a brick through the restaurant window. Mrs. Chen is shaken but unharmed. The brick had a message attached." What did it say? There was a pause. It said, "Return what isn't yours." Pete's blood ran cold. They know I live here. They know exactly where I am. We're increasing security. I'm having additional officers stationed outside. Pete, I know this is terrifying, but we're almost there. Just 12 more hours until the raids. Once those happen, Castellano will be too busy dealing with his own arrest to worry about you. And if something goes wrong, if he doesn't get arrested? Martinez didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was firm but honest. Then we moved to Plan B. Witness protection, relocation, new identity if necessary, but it won't come to that. We have everything we need to take him down. After hanging up, Pete checked on Mrs. Chen through his window. He could see her standing on the sidewalk in her bathrobe, gesturing animatedly to police officers, while her cat wound between her legs. He felt a wave of guilt. She'd been targeted because of him, because he lived in her building. The rest of the night passed without incident, though Pete didn't sleep. He sat on his futon, with the bat across his lap, watching the door, listening to every sound. Footsteps in the hallway made his heart race. A car backfiring outside sent him to the window. Every shadow seemed threatening. At 5:30 a.m., as the first gray light of dawn began seeping through his window, Martinez called again. "We're moving." Raids are executing now at Castellano construction offices, De Luca's residence, and 3 other locations simultaneously. Pete, turn on the news. Channel 6 is already covering it. Pete fumbled for his remote and turned on his small TV. The local news was indeed showing live footage. Police cars and FBI vehicles outside a modern office building in Center City. Officers in windbreakers carrying boxes of evidence. Reporters scrambling to get the story. Breaking news this morning as federal and local authorities execute search warrants at multiple locations connected to Castellano construction and development. Sources tell us this is part of a major public corruption investigation involving city construction contracts. We're seeing agents removing what appears to be computers, file boxes, and other evidence. The news anchor continued, but Pete barely heard the words. He watched as, on screen, a handcuffed man in an expensive suit was led from the building. The caption identified him as Vincent Castellano, CEO. "We got him," Martinez said through the phone, her voice tinged with satisfaction. "Castellano, De Luca, and 4 others are in custody. Gerald Vance tried to run, got pulled over doing 90 on I-95 heading toward New York. It's over, Pete. You're safe." Pete wanted to feel relief, but all he felt was exhaustion. "Oh, what happens now?" "Now comes the legal process. Grand jury, indictments, trial. You'll need to testify, but that's months away. For now, you can go back to your life." After hanging up, Pete continued watching the news coverage. By 7 a.m., the story had exploded. Reporters were calling it the biggest corruption scandal in Philadelphia in decades. The documents Pete had found were being described as a treasure trove of evidence. Preliminary estimates suggested the fraud exceeded $10 million. Around 8 a.m., there was a soft knock on Pete's door. It was Mrs. Chen, holding a container of homemade dumplings. "Mr. Pete," she said in her heavily accented English, "I bring you breakfast. Police tell me you are a hero. You help catch bad men. I see on TV you are a good man." Pete's eyes stung unexpectedly. "Mrs. Chen, I'm so sorry about your window. You got hurt because of me." She waved this away dismissively. "Window can fix. Justice cannot buy. You do brave thing. Your father, he would be proud." After she left, Pete ate the dumplings slowly, savoring each bite. They were the best thing he'd tasted in days, maybe because they came with no strings attached, no complications, just simple kindness. His phone rang, Sarah calling. "Pete, I just saw the news. They're saying someone found evidence of this corruption scheme. Were you involved in this?" "Yeah," Pete said simply. "I found a box. It had evidence in it. I turned it over to the police." Silence. "Then, there was money in that box, wasn't there? The news is talking about cash evidence." "There was." "How much?" Pete hesitated. "A lot. More than I've ever seen." More silence. Pete could almost hear Sarah processing this, understanding the implications. "And you turned it in. You could have kept it, could have paid for Emma's trip, caught up on your bills, gotten out of that terrible apartment. But you turned it in." "It wasn't mine." Sarah's voice broke slightly. Pete rose. "You are either the most honest man I've ever known or the most foolish. Dad used to say the easy choice and the right choice are rarely the same thing. Your father was a good man. I'd forgotten how much of him was in you." She paused. "About that money in my account, it was fake, Sarah. Someone was trying to frame me. The police traced it. It's evidence now. They'll need to freeze that account temporarily. I figured as much. I haven't touched it." Another pause. "Pete, I'm sorry. I've been so angry at you for so long, blaming you for how our life turned out. But watching this news coverage, seeing what you gave up to do the right thing, I'd forgotten why I fell in love with you in the first place." Pete's throat tightened. "I'm still the same guy who lost his business and lives above a Chinese restaurant." "No, you're not. You're the guy who had the chance to solve all his problems and chose integrity instead. That takes strength I'm not sure I would have had." She took a breath. "Emma wants to talk to you. She's been watching the news too. She's proud of her dad." When Emma came on the line, she was crying. "Dad, the kids at school are talking about it. Someone recognized our last name and asked if I was related to you. I told them you were my father, and for the first time in forever, I wasn't embarrassed. I was proud." Pete had to close his eyes to keep from breaking down. "Sweetheart, I love you so much." "I know, Dad. I'm sorry I've been so distant. I've been unfair to you. Can I come visit this weekend? I want to hear the whole story. I want to spend time with you." "I'd love that more than anything." After they hung up, Pete sat in his shabby apartment and cried, not from sadness or stress, but from a release of tension he'd been carrying for years. His daughter wanted to see him. His ex-wife had spoken to him with respect, even warmth. And he'd done it all by simply being the man his father had taught him to be. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind Pete could never have anticipated. His phone rang constantly, reporters wanting interviews, producers from national news shows offering to fly him to New York, even a literary agent suggesting he write a book about his experience. Detective Martinez advised him to decline all media requests until after the trial, but the attention was overwhelming nonetheless. The Philadelphia Inquirer ran a front-page story with the headline, "Warehouse Workers' Honesty Uncovers Decade of Corruption." The article detailed Pete's discovery of the box and his decision to turn it over to police despite his financial struggles. A reporter had somehow tracked down his employment records, his divorce documents, even his daughter's school enrollment. Pete's entire life was now public record. At Morrison's warehouse, Pete became something of a celebrity. His co-workers, who had mostly ignored him before, now sought him out during breaks to hear the story firsthand. Mr. Morrison called him into his office on Pete's first day back. "Rose, I want you to know that man who came asking about you, Vance, the police said his name was. He tried to bribe me for information about you, offered me $5,000 to tell him your schedule, your route home, whether you'd said anything unusual. I threw him out of my office." Pete was surprised. Morrison had always been a distant, businesslike employer. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." "I should be thanking you. My company does occasional contract work for the city. If Castellano had kept operating, who knows how his corruption might have eventually affected honest contractors like me." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "I'm giving you a raise, $2 an hour. I know it's not much, but you've proven yourself to be a man of character, and that's worth investing in." The raise was modest, but it meant an extra $80 a week. Combined with the fact that Tom at the cleaning company had actually apologized for threatening to fire him and had given him better building assignments, Pete's financial situation was improving incrementally. But the real change came from an unexpected source. 2 weeks after the arrests, Pete received a certified letter from the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. Inside was a formal notification that he was eligible for the city's whistleblower reward program. The letter explained that once the criminal cases were resolved and the city recovered the defrauded funds, Pete could receive up to 10% of the recovered amount. Based on preliminary calculations, the letter stated this could amount to somewhere between $800,000 and $1.2 million. Pete had to read the letter 3 times before the numbers made sense. Even the low estimate would be more money than he could earn in 20 years at his current jobs. The high estimate was incomprehensible, life-changing in ways he couldn't even process. That evening, Emma came to visit as promised. She'd taken a Greyhound bus from Pittsburgh, and Pete picked her up at the terminal. When he saw her, 16 years old now, with Sarah's eyes and his father's stubborn chin, he felt his heart squeeze. They hugged for a long time in the middle of the busy terminal, neither wanting to let go. "Your apartment is exactly as terrible as I imagined," Emma said with a smile as they climbed the stairs past Mrs. Chen's cat. But there was no judgment in her voice, just affection. Pete had cleaned as best he could, bought fresh sheets for the futon where Emma would sleep while he took the floor, and stocked his mini fridge with her favorite drinks. It wasn't much, but it was honest. Over dumplings from Mrs. Chen's restaurant, she'd refused payment, insisting Pete was family now. Pete told Emma the whole story, finding the box, the temptation he'd felt, remembering his grandfather's words, the police investigation, the threats, and finally the arrests. Emma listened intently, asking thoughtful questions. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Dad, can I ask you something? When you had all that money in front of you, what made you turn it in? Really?" Pete considered the question carefully. "I thought about your grandpa, my dad. He always said that being a good man wasn't about what you do when people are watching, but what you do when nobody is. And I realized that if I kept that money, even a little bit, I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror. I wouldn't be the man I wanted to be, the man I wanted you to be proud of." "Were you scared? Terrified? When the detective told me I might be in danger, I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake. There were moments when I wished I'd just walked past that box, let someone else find it. But you didn't. No, and I'm glad. Because, Emma, here's what I've learned. You can't buy back your integrity once you've sold it. That money would have solved my immediate problems, but it would have created bigger ones. I would have known every single day that I'd chosen the easy path instead of the right one." Emma's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Mum says you might get a reward, that it could be a lot of money. Maybe, but that's not why I did it. I know. That's what makes you different." Emma reached across the small table and took his hand. "Dad, I owe you an apology. I've been so angry at you for the divorce, for being poor, for not being able to give me the things my friends have. But you gave me something better. You showed me what it means to have principles. My friends have nice clothes and the latest phones. But how many of their parents would have done what you did?" Pete squeezed her hand, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. They spent the weekend together, walking through the city, visiting the Philadelphia Museum of Art, eating cheesesteaks at Pat's. Pete couldn't afford much, but Emma seemed to treasure every moment. She took selfies of them together and posted them on social media with the caption, "My dad, my hero." On Sunday evening, as Pete prepared to take Emma back to the bus station, there was a knock at his door. It was Sarah. "I drove down," she explained, looking uncomfortable in the shabby hallway. "Thought I'd save Emma the bus ride back and maybe we could talk?" The three of them went to a diner nearby. Over coffee and pie, Sarah and Pete had their first honest conversation in years. She apologized for her bitterness, for poisoning Emma against him, for not seeing how hard he'd been trying. "I was angry that life didn't turn out the way we planned," Sarah admitted. "I blamed you for the business failing, for the divorce, for everything. But Pete, you didn't fail. Circumstances failed you, and instead of becoming bitter like me, you stayed decent. That takes a kind of strength I didn't appreciate." "I had plenty of bitter moments," Pete assured her. "There were nights when I felt like the universe was punishing me for trying to do right. But you kept trying. That's what matters." Sarah hesitated, then added, "I'm not saying we should get back together. Too much has happened, and we're different people now. But I want us to be friends. I want Emma to have both her parents in her life, really in her life. I'd like that too." As Pete watched Sarah's car disappear down the street with Emma waving from the passenger window, he felt something shift inside him. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for years felt less suffocating. The future, which had always seemed bleak and predetermined, suddenly held possibilities. Over the next month, Pete's life continued to transform in small but significant ways. The media attention eventually died down, replaced by the next scandal. But in his neighborhood, Pete noticed a change in how people treated him. Mrs. Chen introduced him to other tenants as the hero. The owner of the Vietnamese restaurant gave him free spring rolls with his takeout. Even the kids who usually loitered on the corner showed him respect. More importantly, his relationship with Emma deepened. They talked on the phone 3 times a week. She came to visit twice more, and Pete made the trip to Pittsburgh once, staying in a cheap motel just to spend a weekend with his daughter. She introduced him to her friends, and he could see the pride in her eyes when she said, "This is my dad." The criminal case against Castellano and DeLuca moved forward rapidly. The evidence Pete had found was so damning that both men's attorneys were already negotiating plea deals. The city had begun recovering assets, frozen bank accounts, seized properties, reclaimed funds. With each step, the likelihood of Pete's whistleblower reward increased. But Pete tried not to think about the money. He'd learned that anticipating windfalls was a dangerous game. Instead, he focused on the present. His jobs, his apartment, his daughter, his slowly rebuilding life. In March, Detective Martinez called with an update. "Pete, I wanted you to hear this from me first. Castellano's taking a plea deal, 15 years no parole. DeLuca got 10 years. Gerald Vance is fighting his charges, but the evidence against him is overwhelming. He's looking at 20 years minimum. So it's over. The criminal phase, yes. The civil recovery is still ongoing, but the DA's office says you should expect your reward within 6 to 8 months. Pete, I've seen the preliminary numbers. You're looking at just over $900,000 after taxes and legal fees." Pete sat down heavily. Even expecting it, hearing the number made his head spin. That's real? It's real. You did something brave and the city wants to honor that. You're going to be okay, Pete. More than okay. That evening, Pete called Emma and Sarah together on a 3-way call. He told them about the plea deals and the expected reward. "Dad, that's incredible," Emma shouted. "You're going to be rich." "Not rich," Pete corrected gently. "Comfortable. There's a difference. And Emma, I want you to know that I'm setting aside money for your college education. Whatever's left after that, I'll use to maybe start my electrical business again, get a better apartment, and yes, take you and your mom out for a nice dinner." "Pete, you don't owe me anything," Sarah said, but he could hear the emotion in her voice. "I know, but I want to. You're Emma's mother, and you've been carrying the financial burden alone for too long. Let me help, just a little." After hanging up, Pete walked to his window and looked out at Philadelphia's skyline. The city looked different to him now, not the gray, oppressive place he'd been trudging through, but a place where good things could happen, where integrity mattered, where one person's choice could make a difference. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad, I've been thinking. When I graduate high school, I want to come back to Philadelphia for college. I want to be closer to you. You're the kind of person I want to learn from." Pete read the message 3 times, his vision blurring with tears. He'd given up a box of money to do what was right, and in return, he'd gotten back something infinitely more valuable. His daughter's respect, his ex-wife's friendship, his own self-respect, and a future that finally held promise. As he lay down to sleep that night, Pete thought about his father's words. Being a good man isn't about what you do when people are watching, but what you do when nobody is. Nobody had been watching that rainy November night when Pete found the box. But he'd made the right choice anyway, and that choice had changed everything. 6 months later, on a bright September morning, Pete stood outside a small storefront in the Fishtown neighborhood of Philadelphia. The space was empty, but he could see its potential. Large windows for natural light, enough square footage for an office and workspace, close to public transportation. The realtor, a cheerful woman named Janet Morrison, no relation to his warehouse boss, smiled encouragingly. "It's been vacant for 3 months, so the landlord is motivated. With your credit history and the down payment you're offering, I think we can negotiate a very favorable lease." Pete nodded, trying to process that he was actually doing this, starting over, rebuilding the business he'd lost. The whistleblower reward had come through in August, slightly higher than expected. $947,000 after all deductions. It was enough to change his life while also keeping him grounded in reality. He'd paid off all his debts first, including 3 years of back taxes he'd been avoiding. He'd put $200,000 in a college fund for Emma. He'd given Sarah $50,000 to help with expenses and as a gesture of goodwill. Another $100,000 went into a conservative investment portfolio that a financial advisor had recommended. The rest he'd earmarked for starting his electrical business and finding a proper apartment. "I'll take it," Pete said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Janet beamed. "Excellent. I'll draw up the papers. Have you thought about a name for the business?" Pete had thought about little else. He'd considered Rose Electrical or Pete Rose Electric, but both felt too self-centered. Then Emma had made a suggestion during one of their weekly phone calls. "What about Honest Work Electrical? Because that's what Grandpa taught you, right? That honest work matters?" Standing in the empty storefront, Pete smiled. Honest Work Electrical, that's the name. Over the next month, Pete transformed the space. He hired a local carpenter to build workbenches and shelves. He purchased tools, some new, some used, but quality, and stocked supplies. He registered the business with the city, obtained the necessary licenses and insurance, and even hired his first employee, Marcus Webb, a 24-year-old apprentice electrician who reminded Pete of himself at that age, eager, honest, and willing to learn. Pete had also moved out of his studio apartment above the Chinese restaurant, though not before throwing a goodbye party for Mrs. Chen and the other tenants. He'd found a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood, nothing fancy, but clean and quiet with actual functioning heat. The second bedroom was for Emma, for when she visited, and she visited often. Emma had decided to take a gap year before college, working part-time and saving money, but spending at least one weekend a month in Philadelphia with her father. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm. She'd help him at the shop on Saturdays, painting walls and organizing supplies, and they'd spend Sundays exploring the city, trying new restaurants, or just talking. On the day Honest Work Electrical officially opened for business, Pete stood outside the storefront at 7 a.m., staring at the sign he'd had professionally made. The lettering was simple, but elegant. Honest Work Electrical, licensed, insured, trustworthy. Detective Martinez was there for the opening, along with officers Ramirez and Thompson, who'd become friends during those tense weeks of protective custody. Mrs. Chen came, bringing homemade dumplings for everyone. Even Mr. Morrison from the warehouse showed up, along with several of Pete's former co-workers. "Speech!" someone called out, and suddenly everyone was looking at Pete expectantly. Pete's face flushed. He'd never been comfortable with public speaking. But looking at the faces of the people who'd supported him, some old friends, some new, he felt compelled to say something. "I'm not good at speeches," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "But I want to thank all of you for being here. A year ago, I was working 2 jobs just to make rent, barely seeing my daughter and feeling like life had passed me by. Then I found a box on the street, and I had to make a choice. Do what was easy or do what was right." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "My father taught me that being a good man means doing the right thing even when nobody's watching. I did what he taught me, and it changed my life. But not in the way you might think. Yes, I got a reward, and yes, that money has helped me build this business. But the real reward was getting my daughter back, getting my self-respect back, learning that integrity actually does matter in this world." Pete gestured to the shop behind him. "This business is built on that principle. Honest work, fair prices, treating people with respect. That's what my dad believed in, and that's what I believe in. So if you need an electrician, give us a call. And if you know someone who does, tell them about Honest Work." Not because of what happened to me, but because we'll do the job right." There was applause, and Pete felt his eyes sting with tears. Detective Martinez stepped forward and shook his hand. "Your father would be proud, Pete," she said quietly. "I hope so." The first customer walked in at 8:15 a.m. A woman named Patricia, who owned a coffee shop 3 blocks away and needed help with faulty wiring in her espresso machine area. Pete gave her a free estimate and promised to have someone there by afternoon. By noon, he'd scheduled 5 more jobs, including a major rewiring project for a small office building. As Pete worked through those first weeks, he was reminded why he'd loved this profession. There was something satisfying about solving electrical problems, about taking something that didn't work and making it functional again. Each job was a small puzzle, and Pete's years of experience meant he could usually see solutions that less experienced electricians might miss. Marcus proved to be an excellent hire, punctual, detail-oriented, and genuinely interested in learning the trade properly rather than just cutting corners. Pete made sure to teach him not just the technical skills, but also the professional ethics, showing up on time, communicating clearly with clients, cleaning up thoroughly after every job, standing behind their work. "Why do you always sweep up so carefully?" Marcus asked one day after they'd finished installing new lighting in a restaurant. "The cleaning crew's going to come through anyway." "Because it's the right thing to do," Pete explained. "We're in someone's business, their space. We should leave it better than we found it, or at least not worse. That's what honest work means, doing the job completely, not halfway." Word spread quickly about Honest Work Electrical. Pete's story had made him somewhat famous in Philadelphia, and people wanted to support the honest warehouse worker who turned in evidence instead of keeping money. But Pete made sure they stayed because of quality work, not because of his 15 minutes of fame. In November, almost exactly 1 year after finding the box, Pete received a call from the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. Vincent Castellano had died in prison. A heart attack, nothing suspicious. The call was just a notification, standard procedure for witnesses in major cases. Pete hung up feeling strangely empty. He'd expected to feel satisfaction or vindication, but instead he just felt sad. Castellano had been a human being who'd made terrible choices, who'd hurt people and corrupted systems, and now he was dead. His victims would never get the chance to face him in trial. His family, Pete had learned he had 2 adult children, would live with the shame of what their father had done. That evening, Pete met Emma for dinner at a small Italian restaurant in South Philly. She was animated, talking about her plans to apply to Temple University for the following fall, about the job she'd gotten at a bookstore in Pittsburgh, about a guy she'd started dating. "Tell me about this guy," Pete said, slipping naturally into protective father mode. Emma laughed. "His name is David. He's studying to be a teacher, and he's very nice. You'll like him. I'm bringing him to Philadelphia next month so you can meet him." "A teacher, huh? Does he know about your criminal father?" "Dad!" Emma swatted his arm playfully. "You're not a criminal. You're literally the opposite of a criminal. You're the guy who caught the criminals." They ate their pasta in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Emma set down her fork and looked at her father seriously. "Dad, can I ask you something? Do you ever regret turning in that money? I mean, I know it worked out, but there must have been moments when you wondered, what if?" Pete considered the question carefully. "Honestly, in those first few weeks, when I was scared and broke and didn't know how it would end, yes, I had moments of regret. But Emma, here's what I learned. Regret over doing the right thing doesn't last. If I'd kept that money, if I'd compromised my integrity, I'd still be regretting it every single day. Some decisions haunt you, and some decisions free you. I chose the one that freed me, even though it was hard. Especially because it was hard. Easy choices don't build character, sweetheart. Hard choices do, and I wanted to be someone you could be proud of." Emma's eyes glistened. I am proud of you, Dad. So proud. My friends think I'm lucky because of the money, but that's not why I'm lucky. I'm lucky because you showed me what real integrity looks like. That's worth more than any amount of money. As they walked back to Pete's car after dinner, Emma linked her arm through his. The November air was crisp and cold, reminiscent of that night a year ago when everything had changed. But unlike that night, Pete wasn't hunched against the cold, exhausted and hopeless. He walked with his head up, his daughter beside him, and a future that finally felt bright. Back at his apartment, Pete made tea while Emma curled up on the couch with her laptop, working on college application essays. He sat in his chair, a decent one now, bought from a real furniture store, and looked around his living room. There were actual pictures on the walls, including several new ones of him and Emma. The TV was bigger, the furniture matched. It wasn't luxurious, but it was comfortable and clean and truly his. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How was dinner with Emma? She texted me that you two had a good talk. It was great. She's growing up so fast. Thank you for sharing her with me. Pete, I've been thinking about what you did, giving me that money. You didn't have to do that. The court never ordered it, and I probably didn't deserve it after how I treated you. Emma deserved it. And you've been taking care of her all these years. It was the right thing to do." There was a pause. Then, for the longest time I thought you were weak because you couldn't provide the way I wanted you to. But I was wrong. Integrity isn't weakness. It's the hardest kind of strength. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. Pete stared at the message, feeling a lump form in his throat. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. That night, after Emma had gone to bed in her room, Pete stood at his window looking out at Philadelphia. The city sparkled with lights, each one representing someone's life, someone's story, someone's struggles and triumphs. Somewhere out there, someone else was probably facing a choice between easy and right. Pete hoped they'd choose right. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Being a good man isn't about what you do when people are watching, but what you do when nobody is. Pete had made his choice on a dark, rainy street with nobody watching. He'd chosen integrity over comfort, principle over convenience. And while the path had been terrifying and uncertain, it had led him here, to this moment, with his daughter sleeping safely in the next room, his business growing, his relationships healing, and his self-respect intact. The reward money had changed his circumstances, but the choice itself had changed him. He was the man his father had raised him to be, the man he wanted Emma to know, the man he could see in the mirror without shame. As Pete climbed into bed that night, he thought about all the people whose lives had been touched by his choice. The city workers who would benefit from the recovered funds, the honest contractors who would no longer have to compete against Castellano's corrupt practices, the citizens who would have a little more faith that integrity still mattered. One person's choice, made in the darkness when nobody was watching, had created ripples that spread farther than Pete could have ever imagined. And in the end, that was the real reward. Not the money, but knowing that he'd made a difference. That he'd stood at a crossroads between easy and right, and he'd chosen right, just like his father had taught him.